Joining us now is spokesman for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA, Qasim Rashid. Qasim, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Liz. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. All right, Qasim, I've read some of your commentary on the Orlando attacks following that tragedy in Florida, and you say that demonizing American Muslims isn't the solution to fighting radical Islamists here at home. Do you feel that demonizing of American Muslims is happening?
Anytime you have the presumptive nominee trying to ban people based off of a religious test, then not only is it demonization, but it's against the U.S. Constitution. And that's what concerns me both as an attorney who is sworn to uphold the Constitution, but also as a Muslim American who lives here and enjoys the freedoms that every citizen in the country should.
Right, but you understand that that Donald Trump's proposal to temporarily stop immigration, that's not American citizens that he's talking about. That's not the current population of American Muslims. That's people who are not citizens who want to come here.
Well, aside from the fact that this extremist in Orlando was a U.S. citizen who was born and raised here, aside from the fact that Trump's proposal wouldn't actually solve anything, when we look at the facts, what we find is that since the Sandy Hook massacre, there have been 998 mass shootings in America. 3 have been done by American Muslims. 995 have been done by non-Muslims. If Trump was serious about stopping these mass shootings, he'd be focusing on those 995, not trying to demonize the small minority to win some kind of political game or political votes, which is actually not even working for him.
Right, and that's a different topic for a different day. It's certainly an interesting conversation to talk about the gun control measures, but I do want to stay, because you're an expert on this issue, I do want to stay on Islamic law here. And we've talked many times before about this, how you believe that radical jihadists or radical Islamists, however you want to classify them, these terrorists who claim their motivation is their interpretation of Sharia law, you believe that they misinterpreted it. That is not the true Islam, that they're perverting it. But Qasim, let me ask you about this. Many Muslims around the world interpret Sharia law, and I'm talking a majority of Muslims in Muslim-majority countries, to teach that gay and lesbianism is an abomination, that gay and lesbian people should be punished or put to death. In 36 Muslim-majority countries, homosexuality is illegal. In 10 of those countries, those people can be put to death. What do you comment on that?
Well, the reality is that this is a reflection of failed or inconsistent Muslim leadership. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community, as Muslims who believe in the Messiah, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, have demonstrated in every nation we've lived in what true Islam stands for. We have a track record of over 100 years of pure peace, of service to humanity, of separation of mosque and state. So not only do these individuals misrepresent what Islam teaches, they create new law where none exists. You know, the Quran has no punishment for someone who is gay. It does not allow, certainly does not allow to kill someone because they are gay. These extremists who are promoting this draconian ideology are either concocting it out of their own accord or they're borrowing from Leviticus, the Old Testament. But there's nothing in the Quran that permits this kind of persecution or violence.
Okay, now President Obama has called this a terror attack. He actually said that from the get-go, that it was an act of terror. A lot of other people are saying that it was just a hate crime by a hateful person with anti-gay ideology. Do you consider this to be a terror attack?
I think I consider this, and I consider the attack in Charleston to be terrorist attacks. I think anytime you're targeting somebody because of any kind of protected class, you're terrorizing them. I mean, the difference, unfortunately, is that this is being called a terrorist attack, but the attack on black Americans in Charleston is not being called a terrorist attack. So I think if we're going to be calling this terrorism, we should be consistent about it so people can recognize it and we can work together to end this kind of terrorism. And we do that with education, we do that with dialogue. We don't do that with demonization or by ostracizing an entire community.
Right, and I actually agree with you on that one point that the Charleston attack was indeed an act of domestic terror, just like the attack in Orlando, and it should be called as such. We're almost out of time. I do want to ask you one more question. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have both called this act an act of radical Islam. They've identified that as the motivation behind Omar Mateen's mass killing. Obama, when asked why he hadn't called it that, said, what difference does it make what we call that? What difference does it make whether you assign that motivation the name radical Islam or not? But Qasim, it's pretty elementary in warfare to know your enemy is to defeat them. So you champion education, you champion communicating to Muslims around the world the difference between what you believe the true Islam to be versus the perverted version that you believe these radical Islamists to follow. So isn't it then important to recognize that the motivation behind this killing was this individual's belief, his interpretation of what he believed, his religion, and he called it Islam, to teach him to kill gays?
Well, words matter, and this is why it's so important that we recognize the difference between true Islam and extremism. President Obama went on to say that simply calling it radical Islam isn't going to solve anything. All that's going to do is create more harm, because then you're conflating extremism with Islam. We didn't call the Charleston terrorists a radical Christian. We didn't call Timothy McVeigh a radical Christian. We call them radicals, we call them terrorists. But we don't do them the disservice, or do the religion the disservice, of conflating them with this terrorist ideology, because all that does is it tells extremists that they are winning the ideological war. The solution is to separate the two and let extremists know that they have nothing to do with religion, because no religion teaches terrorism.
Right, and I do understand your point. I understand your point that words matter, that it does associate the act of terrorism with the religion, and especially those who believe that it's not the true Islam. That's a disservice to them. But at the same time, I think from an objective standpoint that it is very important to identify the motivations of any terrorist, particularly this one, because we're talking about the Orlando massacre here. We're talking about Omar Mateen. It is very critical to identify his motivations to prevent this type of tragedy, this type of terror attack from happening again. But Qasim, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Great conversation as usual.